So hello everyone. This is another episode of Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're listening to us on another platform, thanks so much. We have somebody that's got a lot of knowledge on politics and government. He is the chair of the American History and also Government and Civics at Florida Southern College. And with that said, this is Bruce Anderson. Mr. Anderson, thanks so much for coming on the program. Greatly appreciate your time today.
You bet. Anytime, especially around the election, right? Okay. It's a crazy mix of races, and each one of those is important in its own way. There's tremendous emphasis on the presidential. Always, every 4 years we're going to run into this, but there's more now than probably has ever been before. The voter turnout early has been tremendous for Democrats. I think you've got a lot of angry people out there. There are very few undecided voters, which make the polls a bit more supportable than they would normally be. But it's not the tight race that anybody was looking toward, say, a year ago. A year ago, we're looking at another 4 years of Mr. Trump.
Are you worried, though? Because we saw what happened in 2016 with the polls. Obviously, it's two different candidates. We had Hillary Clinton, where we did see a lot of sexism against her, whereas Joe Biden is a guy, so we're not going to see any sexism against him. But are you still worried about the polls, or you think it's fairly going to be pretty much a blowout?
No, and I wasn't worried about the polls in 2016. Anybody that was banking on, a Hillary win based on, a couple of snap polls, in the final couple of days was wrong to do so anyway. The problems with Hillary's campaign were deep and early. When she decided that she would not campaign in Wisconsin and Michigan, I think she made a terrific error. We called her on it at the time. It was in my column, as a matter of fact, in the in what is now USA Today Gannett, but it was just in the Ledger. And we called her on it and said, gee, why is she ignoring these places? You cannot, bank on a place like Wisconsin in times like these. And she couldn't, and she didn't. And unfortunately, that's what lost the deal for her. Pennsylvania had probably gone long before that. It was a little undercover because I think the polls were hopeful and that it was going to be a tight race. But if you do what I do, which is to sit down and start playing around with the Electoral College stuff, Trump looked very possible. He looked very possible on election day. And I'm not going to say it wasn't a shock, because it was. But was it a big shock? No, and not because of the polls. The polling was actually good. It was the interpretation of the polls by journalists, I think, that was wishful thinking on the part of a lot of people that really didn't like Mr. Trump. A dispassionate look at those polls would have said, you're probably into some dangerous territory if you're relying on that margin.
So why do you feel like people did not see what you saw?
Well, I think that there's not a whole lot of, you're going to have it because you're a political science major, but there's not a lot of investment in soft knowledge on statistics. And we know that there was a 5%, sway one way or the other. It's a 95% confidence interval on the best of polls. And polling, of course, has suffered over the last 10 years of having a kind of a bad respondency rate and so on and so forth. And you don't really know who you're talking to about half the time. So you have to expand that by at least 2 points and say anything that lies within that 7 is a coin flip. It's a Monte Carlo at that point. And unfortunately, what people were seeing was Hillary was ahead by 3 points or 4 points here and there. And they were saying, oh, well, clearly, she's going to win this, when anybody that knows anything about statistics knows that that's well within the margin of error. And there was no particular reason to think that she would.
Democrats rather going to win the Senate and the House back?
It's hard to say. Obviously, I'm going to equivocate because, making predictions at this stage is always dangerous for anyone, particularly somebody that, I'm going to have to eat this, in about 3 weeks. But the bottom line is that you've got some very vulnerable seats on the Republican side. I think Susan Collins is probably toast. I think that Gardner is probably toast in Colorado. I think that Tillis has got some real trouble in North Carolina. He thought he had won through when the sexting thing came out about his opponent. But man, that made absolutely no dent in the guy's lead over Tillis, none. And part of this is due to Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump has normalized that kind of thing to such a degree that voters are no longer paying any attention to it. So they're going to have to pay the price for that. They cannot play the morals card anymore the way that they once did, not with anything other than, gross hypocrisy. They look like hypocrites when they pull that. So that's three. The question is, do you have at least one more to make the difference if they do not win the presidency? And looking around the country, you've got some out there. Michigan looks like it could be, a good win. Gary Peters came out with I don't know if you heard his abortion story the other day.
I did
It was
not.
an amazing story, because he was getting hit on all sides by sort of right to life, this, that, and the other. And he said, let me tell you a story about my experience. And he told a story about his wife, who was 4 months pregnant when her water broke. And they could not find a hospital that would give them a simple DNC because of the restrictions on abortion. And he said the only way they were able to get a DNC was that they were acquainted with a hospital administrator that went in through a back door and got it for them. Otherwise, his wife would be dead. It was an amazing story and told in an amazing personal kind of way. And I think it shut down the opposition to some of the things he was saying about the right to life thing. So Peters could win. You've got some, there's some real kind of undercurrent going on in Montana right now that is worth at least paying attention to. So, the Democrats have it within reach to retake the Senate.
So
If they win the presidency, they need one less seat because they'll have the vice presidency. But we could be looking at a switch there.
But you think the House is safe then?
The House is safe. I don't think there's much question about that. If you look at the competitive seats in the House and the possible swing, the Republicans could pick up an aggregate of about 6 seats, I think is the conservative estimate right now. A more liberal estimate from the Republican side says maybe 10, but it's not going to be enough.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about the students, Bruce. Now you're all over the campus. I mean, now there's no sports, but you did go to sporting events. You know these
Absolutely.
kids a lot. What is the take as far as the most important issues that the students have?
Yeah, the clearly the most proximate issue is a pandemic, because it's affecting their lives right this minute. And that is that they're not sure what they're going to be able to do when they graduate. They're not sure what they're going to be able to do in the meantime. Nobody knows when this will end. We've got a lot of students that are sitting at home right now, because of, the safety measures that we've taken at Florida Southern, which I think are entirely appropriate, but nonetheless incredibly painful to students that are juniors, that are sitting at home and not used to being at home, not used to being with the parents, and kind of thrust into roles that they're not used to being in.
Right.
So I'd say the pandemic is first and foremost. I know that among our first year students, the only reason that we're still, on campus is because those people have been behaving themselves. Those people have been paying attention to safety standards. They've been wearing masks. They've been wiping things down. They have been reporting it when they're ill and so on and so forth. Otherwise, we'd be remote, like half the colleges in the country are. Some didn't even attempt it, and some that did attempt it abandoned the attempt about 2 weeks in. We haven't had to do that because they're hyper aware. The second issue has got to be the economy. And that is an outgrowth of the pandemic immediately, because you're talking about young people that are getting ready to enter the workforce, and they're concerned. If they are going to graduate school, they're going to law school. If they're kids in my department, for example, the worry is a little less because they know what they're going to be doing. But for students that had banked on going to work in the corporate world, banked on going to work for Geico or for Publix or some of the other corporations, it's a little hit or miss, at this point, and they're a little worried about that. So I'd say the economy and the pandemic, first and foremost, healthcare.
Who are the candidates that a lot of your students are for? Is there a mix, or is it, tilted to one side?
No, it's a real mix. We have about equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats on campus. Both groups are very active. Both groups are heavily campaigning. We have a very interesting race in the 15 here, the CD15, because the incumbent, Ross Spano, was kicked out by a city commissioner from here in Lakeland. And Franklin, this cat, is a local. And the guy that's running against him, Cohen, is actually from Tampa. And Cohen has run before. And when he ran before, he did not make a great hit in Polk. He, matter of fact, did not campaign here. He thought he would win simply by gathering votes in Hillsborough County, and that was unfortunate. He's done a little better about doing some things in Polk since, but I think there are some, not only people that live in Polk, but also people that are students at Florida Southern that are looking at Franklin because they like him. He's kind of, he's a Trump supporter, and he'll sort of parrot some of the things that Trump says. But the fact is that Trump is from Polk County, and that means a lot to locals and for students that have worked with him as a commissioner and so on and so forth. So, we have people that are kind of splitting their ballots, but the Democrats and the Republicans are usually divided in terms of their campaign support and their internships and so on among those candidates. We have about 5 students that are working for a Republican Party of Florida that are working on the Trump campaign. And we have 5 or 6 that are working for either for Mr. Khan, or they're working for one of the House folks that, people that are running for the Florida House, or they're working for a Senate race, or they're working for a county commission race, which is, there's a contender there, Bob Doyle, who had been a county judge. And Bob is well known as someone who ran a very tough campaign against Kelly Stargell, a longtime Republican from Polk County. And a lot of these students remember that campaign, worked for Bob then, and are working for Bob now. So, you've got a good mix. The really cool thing about this is that the students seem to be able to get along more or less. I don't think the polarization thing, it has bred some fights and it has bred some nasty arguments. But the bottom line is that these are students that have to be in class together. They work together on projects. They know each other. They're less likely to go after each other the way that they do at some places. So pretty happy with that.
Sorry to interrupt you, Bruce. Is there any Trump is there any never Trump Republicans?
There are, but they're very quiet. They're very quiet.
Okay.
They're ballot casters rather than pontificators, if that makes any sense. They're less likely to trumpet this around. But I know that there are Republican students, that I know that have shared with me that they have no plans to vote for the current incumbent. They're voting a straight Republican ticket otherwise, but they cannot bring themselves to vote for Trump. And the problem is that Mr. Trump has a real problem with this generation. This is a generation of young conservatives that are not willing to listen to a lot of anti-Semitic crap. They're not willing to listen to a lot of racist nonsense. They hate white supremacists. We're talking about conservatives here, Republican conservatives that don't want any part of this. And so they're very unlikely to cast a ballot for this cat.
Are they going to be voting for Biden, or would they just leave it blank? Have they said anything to you about that?
I think they're going to be voting for Biden.
Wow.
Because I do think they will turn in a complete ballot, and it's a protest vote. They will go right back to voting for whoever the next Mitt Romney or John McCain is that comes down the trail. They are Republicans. They are not Democrats, but they are worried about the future of their party, and I think rightly so. Particularly the fiscal conservatives and so on that are concerned. The other thing about these conservatives is that they're not bound up in a lot of social issues. They may be right to life, but they're not going to be they're not homophobic. They're not, they just don't understand issues like that. Those are not the issues that are important to them. What's important and I don't want to put words in their mouths, but what I'm hearing is, I'm worried about the deficit. I'm worried about taxes. I'm worried about, the government intruding into every angle of my life. And that extends to, my compadres who happen to be gay. I don't want them interfering with their lives either. They're much more libertarian as far as their social issues are than maybe 20 years ago. So it's hard to find a hater among the GOP at this level, at this age. They're just not. And
even the people that are real Trump fanatics at the school, they're not really into all that stuff.
Well, it's hard to find a real Trump fanatic. Well, I found supporters for Trump, but they are supporting Trump because he's the Republican candidate.
Oh, okay.
I don't think he's well liked, even among people that will vote for him.
Wow.
They're voting in an instrumental way. They're voting for a Republican, but they're not voting for the personality Donald J. Trump. Like they did in 2016. I think there were. I think you had a lot of them. that were impressed by him, that were wearing, red hats and so on, and make America great again, and et cetera. And they were all into the spirit of the moment. I don't see that spirit now. I see.
Can we talk about this though, Bruce, as we're moving toward the end of the interview? Because this is going to go to people around the country too, not just Florida. Some of the stuff as far as Chris and stuff, I just want to know because I live in that district. But with this, let's talk about these questions because I think this is important. Obviously, everybody knows that Florida is a swing state, the 29 electoral votes. With that said, can you tell the people that are listening that are not from Florida, how do they win Florida?
Well, they have to do what every winning candidate has done, and that is that they have to hit the area that runs between Tampa, St. Pete, over to Cocoa. And if they don't follow the I-4, if they don't follow these communities here, like Lakeland, like Winter Haven, like Bartow, the little rural areas that can go either way, then they're going to lose. The bottom line is that the Democrats have always had sort of the front door and the back door. They've had Orlando and they've had Tampa, but it's the area in between that really matters. Where you are, for example, this area here. In 2012, we had Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan came through. They spent 2 days in Lakeland, and then Paul Ryan came back. We had Newt Gingrich here, the time before. John McCain visited here. You cannot envision a candidate that wants to win Florida not coming through this little area here. And it's bizarre. It's like being in New Hampshire or something, that we get pummeled with mailers, we get pummeled with advertising, we get pummeled with candidate visits, we get pummeled. We had 11 Trump rallies between April and Election Day that were within a bus drive of here. And I know because I took my students to them. So, what do? This is where you win it. You got to have Miami if you're a Democrat. And you got to win Duval County if you're a Republican. You've got to take the Panhandle, and that's from Jacksonville over to Pensacola. But this is the area that's always going to be a little iffy for either party.
But Bruce, the pandemic's really changed this. So, what candidates right now do you feel like is really putting in that work in this area, but in the whole state of Florida in general?
Well, I think both candidates have dedicated millions in terms of advertising, television advertising and Facebook advertising, social media. They've put their phone banks to work down here. Any college student that wants a job can have one, phone banking for a candidate down here at $15 an hour, or $12 an hour, whatever it is. So they are putting in the money. Mr. Trump just removed his advertising, most of his advertising from Wisconsin and Minnesota. And he took those dollars and started shoving dollars into Florida, hoping that he can win one down here. It's Florida and North Carolina for Mr. Trump. So that's where those dollars are going. You're right, there isn't the retail politics that we've had in this area here before. The banging on doors, for example. I mean, clearly that's a little iffy during a pandemic. But they're making the phone calls and they're sending the emails and they are beating the bushes. So signs are going up. Signs are big down here in Florida, less so some other places, but pretty big down here. So I think they're doing their jobs. It's hotly contested.
So my question to you is to keep going into this subject is, I've been driving around this area from Lakeland all the way up to Daytona in the past couple of weeks, and I see so many Biden signs that even when Obama was running in 08 and 12, I never even seen this many bumper stickers or signs for Obama. It's incredible. Which in 2016 I saw a lot of Trump bumper stickers, Trump signs, nearly no Hillary signs or bumper stickers. Do you feel like that's a huge thing now that we're seeing all these Biden signs? Maybe you're not seeing that, or is it just me?
Let me tell you my story. I went up to Dade City on Friday night. I had to go up and I gave a little talk up there at the Historical Society, which, by the way, free advertising for those guys. If you ever get a chance to go up and see their historical Florida Pioneer Village thing up there, go up and see it. It's a lot of fun. But I drove up through Pasco County, which is relatively conservative turf. And I saw the same thing you did. I saw a lot of Biden signs. I saw no Trump signs on the way up. Now, does that mean, anything in the great scheme of things? Well, it may mean that the Biden folks are simply better at placing signs. But it may also mean that people that are voting for Trump don't necessarily want everybody to know that. they may be a little embarrassed at having to vote for this cat. It's getting very difficult to explain a vote for Mr. Trump among your reasonable folks. Now, fanatics, of course, on either side are always going to, tout their candidate, but I think it's a little harder to put up a Trump sign this time than it was in 2016. In 2016, I think there was a lot of pride behind that, and some real sort of feeling that things were going to change and so on. There was a real mission. This time around, I'm not sure it's there. And I think in the end, if Mr. Trump drops this race, it'll be because of those folks, that they have decided they just can't pull that lever this time.
So let's talk about actually the Florida State Senate. Now we see a lot of these races up for grabs. The House in Florida, it's not going to happen for the Democrats. There's no chance in hell that they can pick up that many seats. But the Senate is in reach. What is your take on the Democrats maybe taking the Florida State Senate this year?
I think that for every Republican out there that may sit on the couch or even cast a vote for Biden, they're still going to vote for Florida Republicans for the Senate. And I think the Senate is at this point unreachable for Democrats. I think they're gonna come close, and I think that's great. But the Democratic Party has not been unified behind their Senate candidates in ways that they need to be in order to take a really instrumental shot at trying to take the Senate. That requires coordinated campaigns, and coordinated campaigns with state house candidates in Florida have been difficult for the Democrats ever since Lawton Chiles. So what they need is leadership at the top. Not a lot of that there in the Democratic Party. The DNC has not been a great help. They're so panicked about the presidency that, dollars are simply not coming down this far, and, donors are not coming down this far. So, I mean, I wish it were true. I really do. I would love to see divided government in Tallahassee under the current governor. I think that would be marvelous. I do think that in 2 years, you may see some serious changes. And I think that, Florida will begin to reflect its somewhat schizophrenic outlook politically. It really is two places down here. It is a Democrat place and it is a Republican place, even though that's not currently reflected in Tallahassee.
Staying on this subject, in 2022, we're going to see a Florida governor's race coming up. We see a lot of the younger progressives looking at Anna Eskamani to maybe run. I've also heard Jason Pizzo down in Miami. He's a state senator that's been doing a lot of work also on Florida unemployment, along with Anna also. And then we see, obviously, Nikki Fried, Gwen Graham may be looking into this. You see as the Democratic nominee in 2022 going up against Ron DeSantis. I know this is real early, but the candidates that I named, do you see one of them, or do you see maybe somebody else jumping in?
I think you covered the field. I think those are probably the folks that are likely to contend for this. And my personal preference would be for Anna. Largely because she's local and because I know her and because I've been watching her since she was at the inception point. She is absolutely authentic all the way through. And I'm Nikki Fried, of course, we know down here the reason she won Ag Commissioner in Florida is because of places like Polk County and Pasco County and Lake County, Western Lake County, is because she came down and talked to people down here and said, how can I help? I don't know anything about agriculture. Tell me the story. And she's really kind of followed through on that. And so I think she'd be a good candidate, but I think she's also made some enemies that Anna has not made. Anna has always been very straight up and very legit with her opponents. I think she commands respect among, people that she has opposed. She's never been nasty. She has never, reacted to nastiness in a kind of tit for tat kind of a way. And I think that's important in state house politics. So I would hope. Gwen Graham, I think, she's lost. And, I'm sorry, but, I like Gwen, I really do. And I really had high hopes for her against Gillum, but, Jeb Bush, same kind of thing on the other side, and I don't think either one of them is really, I don't think they're prepared for the ground. Anna has made it through. Well, and they, she has taken over the unemployment issue.
Yes.
It started with just, people like yourself who would call the office and say, I can't get anything out of my rep, is there anything you guys can do? And suddenly find people working for you. And, that sort of became a wave, I think almost by accident, because she was just doing what she normally does, which is straight up constituency service. And then it was like, well, what about these people from outside the district? She's like, well, yeah, help them too. I mean, what? They're Floridians, aren't they? Aren't they people? I mean, aren't they people that need their unemployment check? But that has characterized the way that she's approached her office. And I think she has a solid record, not only among Democrats, but I think she has a solid record among her opponents. And I think that really does count for something. She commands some real respect. Nikki Fried has started some fights that she didn't need to start, and gotten into some battles that perhaps she didn't need to get into. Battling DeSantis, I think, was probably called for and certainly necessary in the middle of the pandemic. He has mishandled this thing in ways that, I'm not jealous of the status of any governor trying to face this thing down, but you kind of expect a little better out of somebody like DeSantis. Is not dumb. He knows the story.
Right. Well,
I don't
you
know how you
saw
feel
him.
about
I'm sure
that.
you watched the Trump rally, Bruce. He was running around slapping five, hugging people. I mean, are you kidding? Are you a nut? Are you insane?
Well, I went down to Fort Myers when Scott and DeSantis were with Trump back in 2016, and it was an interesting matchup because Scott was kind of on the rails with Trump at the moment, and actually they kept him off stage for most of the evening. But DeSantis was out there with Trump the entire time. For whatever reason, Mr. Trump really likes Mr. DeSantis. I'm not sure that is returned, but I think like Lindsey Graham and some of the other sort of phony Trump supporter types that are trying to get something for their home. The bottom line is that we're not having drilling off our shores here in Florida, largely because Scott was willing to go up against Trump and say no. He paid that price ever since. Is DeSantis willing to do that? Apparently not, and that's unfortunate.
I want to talk about Texas. You did go to Rice University in
I
Houston.
did.
We hear a lot about Texas going blue. I know last time in 2016, I think it was like 5 or 6 points for Trump. Do you believe Texas will go blue? I know a lot of people are moving in to Texas from California and a lot of those blue states out west, Nevada too. So what do you think about Texas going blue?
Well, I think if Texas goes blue, and the projection currently is 2026 for Texas to make the big shift, and it's not because of in-migration from places like Nevada, it's in-migration, period. And that is that you have a lot of folks that, the Hispanic population, the Latinx population in Texas is growing day by day. And they tend to be relatively reliable Democratic voters, unlike, the bifurcated, trifurcated, multiple, divided Hispanic communities in places like Florida.
Right.
You really have a little more unity in a place like Texas, where the Republicans have done that community absolutely no good. So I would have to say probably not this time, but I think that their days are numbered as a red state. I really do. And it's because there are two things. There is a streak of progressivism in Texas that's a mile wide and has been present ever since it was its own country. And that is something that erupts every once in a while, because it's an Ann Richards or Jim Hightower or somebody like that comes out of that tradition. But you also have this growing number of relatively conservative, but nonetheless Democrats that are coming down the pike that are looking for equal opportunity and a real shot at civil rights in Texas. And I think that's what will probably turn the tide eventually. The character of the Texas Democratic Party needs to turn to that population. And, one of the things that I find particularly annoying about the Democrats these days is that they're reaching out to communities of people that are typically not as represented as others, and they're reaching out for votes, but they're not incorporating them into the party. And I want to see Hispanic leadership in Texas. I want to see Hispanic leadership in the Democratic Party there. And I mean, gubernatorial candidates, I mean, senatorial candidates, I'm tired of seeing white folks run the regime. I
Well,
really am.
wasn't there a gubernatorial candidate last time in 2018 that ran against Abbott that was Hispanic?
Yeah, San Antonio Hispanic, as I recall, and did
Yeah.
decently well.
Right.
But we're not seeing this at the upper echelons of the party,
Okay.
right? We're not seeing. I don't see this in the DNC.
Right.
I don't see the Democratic National Committee as much more than sort of, a non-representative group. When you look at the people that vote Democrat, they should be represented at all
Yeah.
levels of the party, and I'm not seeing that.
Bruce, as we end the interview, and this is Bruce Anderson. He is a professor at Florida Southern College in Lakeland, Florida. Bruce, can you tell people where they can find more about you? I know you say you do a column from time to time, but if anybody can find you on social media also?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I have a regular column with USA Today, Gannett, and you can find it for sure at the Ledger every Sunday on the op-ed on the editorial page. So it's right there. I'm afraid I'm not burning any gasoline right now. I'm trying to be calm about this election and hope for the best, but you can certainly find it there.
All right, so we'll definitely look for that in the Lakeland Ledger. So definitely check that out. And Bruce, thanks again for all this. It was really great to hear. Go ahead. Yes.
One final plug. WLKF here in Lakeland. I'm a political analyst for WLKF's Mayhem in the AM every Thursday at 8 a.m. So if you,
Oh,
if you
wow,
can
I didn't
tune in,
know.
there it is.
Bruce, we'll do this again down the road. I appreciate you. I had a lot of fun.
Having fun. All righty. Have a great evening.
You too. Bye now.